To shift, we will now examine Arkansas and their work in innovation zones. Please welcome Dr. Denise Airola, Director of the Office of Innovation for Education in Arkansas. It's interesting, the state of Arkansas created an intermediary organization to manage the statewide innovation work at its house at the University of Arkansas. There are other intermediaries in other states, Arkansas, South Carolina, Colorado, New Mexico, New Hampshire, helping districts to advance innovations. So Dr. Airola, over to you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for this opportunity to share the work that's going on in Arkansas and also the opportunity to hear from others. What I'm fascinated by is how different we all are in trying to do the same type of work, which is to really get at the heart of meeting our learners' needs. In Arkansas, we really have a different focus. As you mentioned, we're an intermediary, and we are funded by the Department of Education to really activate demand and then support that demand for innovation. And we've learned a lot in the 7 years that we've been doing this work. At the heart of it, next slide please, is this vision statement that, that our Department of Ed originally started with, which is that the Arkansas Department of Education is transforming Arkansas to lead the nation in student-focused education. And intentionally, student-focused education isn't defined. It's something that our secretary, our commissioner of education, recognized might look a little different from community to community. And that also, based on where folks are, thinking about personalizing learning for students, personalizing for communities, everybody starts in a different space, in a different place. And so this enables us really to meet folks where they are, activate demand, bring them to the table, and then help them set that table and commence with the meal. So that's a very different approach. Next slide, please. What makes it possible is that we have a lot of enabling policies for innovative transformation, from charter laws that allow both open enrollment and district conversion charter to what we call SOI, Schools of Innovation. We have an Act 1240 that allows any district to ask for a waiver for any state law, statute, rule that another open enrollment charter might have. And then we also have a law in the books that allows for credit by demonstrated mastery. And when all these pieces come together, what we find is that not only as people start activating these different policies within their local environments, but as we learn from schools that are doing these different pieces, that information feeds back into the system and makes changes in the state system. So we no longer have a seat time requirement. There are a lot of waivers that our schools started asking for back in 2014 and 2015 that you no longer need a waiver for, because the state has updated and been responsive to those changes. Next slide, please. Also, another lesson that we've learned in our work with innovation schools is that the original definition about a new or creative alternative to existing strategies and practices that will improve academic performance and learning for all students, that was a starting point. But in the work we do to support schools who are trying to do this on a day-to-day basis within their community, next slide, please, is that this definition, or this quote from John Cotter, really resonates well. It's less about generating brand new ideas and more about knocking down the barriers to making those ideas a reality, because those barriers exist in our traditional structures and routines. And COVID has really shined a light on how existing structures, particularly financial, can really make it difficult for schools that want to be responsive to student-focused learning to get there completely. And I'll say more about that in a little bit. So among those lessons learned is one, next slide please, that this is really a process that no matter what we say it's about, there are things that communities have to go through. And so we learned in this School of Innovation process that in the beginning, you really do have to set your vision. What is your why? And this big idea of putting learners at the center and being student focused, it's easy to say the words. It's much more difficult to make that happen in the traditional settings that we have, even with the waivers that we're able to get from those barriers that might be in our way. And one of the biggest ones is culture, the school culture, and how that school culture has been much more adult focused than it has been learner focused. And it's been much more about resource efficiency than it has been about resources aligned to really supporting the needs of learners in a dramatic way. And so those early years are really the initial component of a school of innovation, is to set that vision, to understand the challenges, and what we do is provide support for them as they put that plan together. During their first 2 years, they're really focused on impact. And they have to come back to the department and to our group and ask for a designation visit where they provide evidence of progress towards their goals. This has really shifted the way that people think about writing goals for innovation. And then finally, once they've been designated, within 4 years, they can choose to continue and renew. And what we find is the ones who do continue to move forward and renew have really experienced a change in mindset, where it's characteristic of the adults and the learners is this desire for continuous growth, this use of inquiry and self-reflection, and a tremendous amount of collaboration coupled with perseverance and to that collective commitment that they create. Next slide, please. So just really the big highlights are that to be student focused, we really help them to look at what are the needs of your learners and how will your plan reflect that you're trying to meet those needs. Schools of innovation are unique in that they require a council of innovation, which helps them to be more successful. For example, they have to collaborate and collaborate in the design and development of the plan, meaning you have to bring in kids, you have to bring in parents, you have to bring in those who are going to be impacted by the plan. It requires a 60% vote within a school, which also we have learned is very important to the success long-term and the ability to actually demonstrate implementation. Next slide, please. We also now require substantial progress because schools are learning from each other through these very powerful networks that have emerged in the work. It's really important that schools are able to demonstrate substantial progress so that other schools can see what they're accomplishing and how it's impacting their learners. So they get 2 years to designate where they're trying out their theory of action around changing their system. And then within 4 years, they move to renewal so that they can continue or tweak or continue the progress. This is a long-term solution to a very, very intractable problem. And so we have to have this ability to work through it as a process. Next slide, please. And you might ask, why so many paths to transformation? Why do we really look at the schools of innovation? What we see over the course of those years is a shift in the mindset of the adults. They don't really expect that this work is going to deeply impact the way that they view what education is. But over time, it does, as they move from talking about it and activating that demand to actually doing it and seeing the results and impact it has. Next slide, please. One of the most powerful pieces of this is the empowered learners that we network. As folks engage, whether they do it through SOI, whether they do it through any of the different opportunities in our state, any of the enabling policies, what we've come to find is that when we bring these learners together in a network, it's very meaningful. They have very meaningful and applied learning and reflection that does lead to change in practice. And then they're able to produce the evidence of that change in practice. This is happening at the school level. This is happening cross-region, cross-district, cross-state. And particularly during COVID, we found that these networks were necessary for survival, for folks to be able to look at the problem of what does the pandemic present and how do we already have some tools in our toolbox to respond to that. And we found that our schools of innovation were really in a better space in terms of responding, in terms of learning. Where they were needing a lot of additional support was in the social emotional side, both themselves and their learners. And so they had been positioned to really pivot from the classroom to how do I make sure learning still occurs even if they're not in the classroom 100% of the time. Next slide, please. That network is now statewide. A couple of lessons learned that we have from the work during COVID. It's really activated a demand for what are the best practices and how do I help my teachers change practice so that they can handle blended learning in the classroom that prepares students to be able to move virtually at a moment's notice because of COVID. The other exciting developments that have come out of this is, as we learn from these powerful networks of educators doing the work, we feed that information up into the system at the state level. And right now we've got professional learning rules that are being shifted completely to allow for competency-based learning for educators, which the group of us that are working on all of this together, we firmly believe that as we move to that for educators, it'll make it easier to move to that for the learner as well, in the systems that are wanting to do that, but not sure how to approach that. The other exciting development out of this has been, we've literally had our educator effectiveness office say, what does a teacher need to look like coming out of the pandemic, coming out of a program? What can we learn from what we've had to do that can inform a portrait or a profile of a teacher that's future focused and student focused? And so that is kind of the work we're doing behind the scenes at the state level, in addition to several other little things, but those are the ones that really highlight the influence the work has had from the grassroots efforts up to the state policy level. And with that, I think last slide is just a contact slide for our team. Our team is so much better at this than I am. I just get to be the person in charge, but our incredibly talented team works closely with the Department of Ed and the division to make sure that schools are supported in doing this work. And so just want to finish with kudos to them, because they've really engaged a network of educators that are powerful learners and spreading that learning throughout the state. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Denise. It's really impressive to see the growth and scale of innovations across Arkansas, but it's also really important to know how important that North Star of the why and the purpose is, combined with, this is not top down. These are educators and communities coming together and focusing on the local wisdom for the new designs, working with youth, working with communities on what they need. And that is really important to keep in mind on this work.